I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. As always, we promise a robust conversation today. I am sure we'll deliver on that promise. You know, I want to thank, first of all, our streaming partners. We're streaming live through Black Press USA, the Black Press of America, through their YouTube page and their Facebook page. Insight News's YouTube and Facebook pages, and we're streaming on LinkedIn and Facebook as well. And we also have a relationship that's awesome and powerful with St. Paul Neighborhood Network and Meet Minneapolis. So you'll be watching this, if not live, later on those cable television stations. I want to thank Meet Minneapolis and SPNN, St. Paul Neighborhood Network in particular, for the awesome work they did. A week and a half ago, we produced a week of live programming and even included in the live programming a live broadcast on KFAI, which preempted the 1 o'clock hour for the entire week to allow us to present George Floyd Week live from George Floyd Square. And all of it adds up to just a wonderful experience of being able to use a variety of platforms to communicate, to connect, to touch, to reach out and to engage you. We are asking you to stay engaged with us. And what we're doing too is using these conversations to create content for our newspaper, our weekly newspaper, Insight News. So these interviews show up as feature stories in Insight News, and we share them across other platforms. Facebook as clips, YouTube as clips. We share them on IG as clips. Our objective is to use every available tool and means to spread the word. What is the word? The word is our understanding of the truth, our understanding, our vision of who we are, where we have come from, and where we must go still. The expectation is that we are all working and trying to build an appreciation for what freedom means for our people. We're standing on the shoulders those that came before, and we have a commitment to becoming and being platforms out of which launch futures that show us as the winners that we are. So with that, again, I thank you. And no matter where you're connecting, we want you to be involved in the program. You can leave comments if you're on either of the Facebook or YouTube channels, simply by dropping your comment in. Let us know where you are. Shout yourself out. We're pleased to hear from you, and we thank you for being a part of this. Well, today I've got two things. One is one of my colleagues, a columnist for Insight News, Taylor Schlitz, is co-piloting. Taylor Schlitz is co-piloting today. She hung out with me most of the week, George Floyd week, and over the course of this conversation, I'm asking Haley to reflect on the things we said and did and what she's watched in our presentation of George Floyd Week. And she's going to support me in interviewing our guests today, our guests, T. Williams and David Lawrence Grant. T stands for Theatrist. I think Theatrist, everybody knows him as T. I know him as T. T is an elder, a leader, a visionary, a philosopher, an activist, an organizer in our community, and a legend, and has got legendary experiences. T knows where all the bones are buried, and he knows all the deeds that were done. And so I feel honored to have a chance to connect with T on his memory, his memoir. The book is called Rewind: Lessons from 50 Years of Activism. And his partner in creating the book, David Lawrence Grant, an exceptional and gifted writer, playwright, worked in a variety of media and research fields. And I'm glad to have them both here today. There's the cover of the book, Rewind: Lessons from 50 Years of Activism. And T and David, I want you to make sure that over the course of the hour, we promote and invite people to come to the book launch coming up in a few days over at Sumner Library, Minneapolis, Hennepin County Library, Sumner on Olson Highway. So that's an important event. T, welcome to the program. Good to see you, my friend. How are you?
Fine, Al, and thanks for the opportunity to come again and talk with you about this time about my book. I was there a few years ago talking about a range of things, and actually I was thinking about and developing the contents of this book at that time.
Okay. Well, I feel compelled to tell people that you and I go back a long ways, T. I think when I first got here and after a year or so got a job at General Mills, the first person they sent me to see and talk to in the community was T. Williams, you. And you've been sort of a steady and steadying hand in my life and career for the past 50 years. So I thank you for that. And what I love too, and I'm glad to report, is that your son is now my grandson's physician. And so that's how connected we are. And David and I discovered, and David's dad was also a mentor of mine, your friend, Sam Grant, right? And David and I discovered on social media or on genealogy programs that he and I are relatives as well. So the world is that small and we're that connected. And I think it's a wonderful thing.
Yes.
T, when you set out to write,
well, this was I didn't really start out to write a book as such. I was getting along in years, and people that I knew that I'd been involved with in the community were moving along, and they all had stories that I thought were worthy of being told. And I also wanted to share the background of how I, with my family, came to Minnesota and why we ended up staying here. And there were a number of institutions that I'd been involved with that I thought had some important stories to be told. Phyllis Wheatley Community Center, the Phyllis Wheatley Settlement House, was the institution that kept me in the community. I came here to work at another settlement house, Unity, which no longer exists. And 8 months or so after I was here, I became the executive director of Phyllis Wheatley. At the time that I was really planning my exit, because when we came here, I told my employer at Unity that I can only commit to staying for 2 years. And because my wife is from Philadelphia, and she didn't like when we were didn't like it when we were living in Chicago, so we got out of Chicago, but it didn't move us toward Philadelphia. It brought us here. And once we got here, it was a strange place compared to where we were in Chicago. But things moved on, and went to Phyllis Wheatley toward the end of 1965. And before I got there, good things began to happen on Plymouth Avenue in 1966. And people were in the streets, and people were making promises and commitments. And the next thing I knew, we were caught up in that. And then we got through 66, and lo and behold, 67 was on us. And that was the year that the country exploded with street violence. And we had ours here in Minneapolis, and things happened there. And it was a little different from what happened before, because it was the people were out in the streets for a longer period of time, and the community became more uneasy about what was happening, and what was going on nationally was having an impact. And Minneapolis were concerned about how could this happen here, particularly our white citizens thought that this was beyond them, and it just could not and should not be happening here. And our corporate leaders and our public leaders and all, they end up in Washington at a convocation that had been created by President Johnson, and he scolded the people and told them to go back home and do something about this, form coalitions between the corporate community and the public and nonprofit community, and get stuff done. Well, the people who went from here, there were about 40 of them, they took that very seriously and came back. And I'm at Phyllis Wheatley. I'm working with the other institutions. There was a new organization that had just been established the year before, particularly focuses on young people, and they were much more radical than we were at Phyllis Wheatley and some of the other places, but they were our friends, and many of the youth had hung out around Phyllis Wheatley, and they moved. Young people move where they think the action is, and they don't care whether it's where it is. They're going to move there and test it, and if you're not their flavor, then they aren't going to stay there. So we ended up for that summer. Things happen, and I'm getting visits and contacts from people that I never knew about or heard about before, because Phyllis Wheatley was seen as that institution that with more sanity about it and wasn't as radical. So we can go talk to them. And I got a visit from John Coles Jr. at the Star Tribune. I knew who he was, but I'd never met him before. So I was surprised that he would come see me. I want to know what it was. And I was very leery about it, but he came and we talked, and he's very low keyed and went away. And it was about a week later, I got a telephone call from a colleague of mine, Larry Harris, asking me, telling me that these rich white people who had been helped, the mayor at the time, Nathalie, had helped gather them together to get them to do something about what was going on. What they were concerned about, there's too much violence. We got to stop those people from being violent. Let's do something. We don't know what. And there were 14 of the Minneapolis elite, the corporate executives from the Star Tribune, from Honeywell, from General Mills, Pillsbury, the bank, and the WCCO television, and the whole lot. And they wanted to hire Larry to do a study, and we'd been studied to death by then. And what we wanted was action. They wanted a study, and they were going to engage Larry to do it. Larry was smart enough to say to them, look, what's it going to look like? Y'all, group of rich white men hiring another white man to go out into the minority community to study them, and then going to come back and they're going to say, well, it's not feasible. What's going to do? You think 67 on Plymouth Avenue was something. You wait until this comes back and see what happened in 68. Well, so that Larry told him that he would not consider anything like this unless he could get someone to work with him on it. And he identified me as that person. Now, I'd been in many, this was 1967. We just got here in 65. So I was yet unestablished myself and hadn't fully established my own credibility, but I think they saw me as safe in that I wasn't in anybody's camp, and so we did it. I told Larry, I said, look, I don't like the notion of going to people and saying we're doing a study. We got to convince these folks that what you're doing is engaging us to help create something, or design an institution, or do something that the people can come to or go to help address these issues. And so they still had that when we met with them, they had in the first thing they put out, they still had that study thing on there. So when Larry and I went across the community, we had to convince the people that this is not a study. They engaged us to help them do something about this, that the people can go to and use and make a difference. So we worked from we were engaged in August, and we went to December, and we recommended to them then that we create this really what was a gangly organization with a board of 60 people, and the executives involved in that thought we were crazy, because and then we insisted that they had to have open board meetings, and they went ballistic almost. That'll never happen. And the other thing we said to them, now you go into this, you got to commit. You can't go in and say this isn't working and step out. This would discredit you and everyone else. And besides that, our necks would be on the line. We wouldn't be able to go back into the community. So we were able to convince them to go in this direction, and for them to recognize that this was not going to be easy, it was going to be disturbing, and people were going to shout at them, yell them, and call them all kinds of ugly names, but they had to stay engaged. And that was what came out of that was the Urban Coalition, and we write about that. David and I write about that in the book, and we talk about how it got started and what happened after that and what its legacies are. Phyllis Wheatley then was there, staying engaged, and the next big thing, we had the students at the University of Minnesota in 1969 take over Morrill Hall. I know Al is familiar with this, and so is David. And I knew a lot of students there, and because a lot of them had worked for us at Phyllis Wheatley during the summer, but I wasn't engaged in anything over there. But I got a telephone call from the president's office at the University of Minnesota, and this was after the takeover, and the students had given the building back, and he wanted to learn what happened and why. And so they created this commission to study the takeover of Morrill Hall, and I was named to that. And I was the lone. There were three people from the community, and one was a bank president, Federal Reserve Bank. The other one was a big-time lawyer, and then there was me. And the other two were white, of course, and I'm black. And there were people from the University of Minnesota on that. And so that we did our commission, and they were attempted to establish a Black Studies department at the university. And we did our thing. And what we came out of that with was that the president of the University of Minnesota really didn't have a choice. He had to support this effort because that was what was needed to be done. And the final thing, in looking at big institutions and so on, in 1971, out in New York, Attica happened. 40 plus people lost their lives, and people here in Minnesota were concerned about their prisons, and they wanted to. They didn't want the same thing to happen. So the governor at that time, Wendy Anderson, used his executive powers to create an organization called the Ombudsman for Corrections. And I was selected to be in Minnesota and the nation's first Ombudsman for Corrections. So we tell that story and a number of others and what runs throughout this is the role of important institutions in our society and the need to have the right leadership in those, and that the need to have leadership that reflected the community, and that the people needed to be there for the right reasons. And so that's my story. And then there's some other that we set that by telling a little bit about who I am and where I came from and all of that kind of stuff, and some of my family and on. Now, I started this as a collection of oral histories, and then the Minnesota Historical Society provided some support for that. And I then decided, well, let's get a manuscript out of this. The Historical Society initially didn't want to publish it because they said I wasn't famous enough to be writing a memoir that they could take to bookstores and they'd be interested in selling it. And so, but they did pay for me producing the manuscript and said, then you can go peddle it to wherever you wanted to. We got through that, and one of the people over there at the time, Ann Regan, saw the content of it and thought it was great content. But look, T, this is so the way you put it together, people aren't likely to read it. And that had been echoed to me by my daughter and several other people. Said, Daddy, the way you have written this, the way you talk, and people will read the first couple of pages, then they're going to stop and put it down. You need to find a way to catch them and tell your story so people will read it. And that was what Ann over there was telling me. I said, well, they said, go out and find somebody that we can work with and that you can work with and redo this thing. And so I I knew about, in fact, I had touch base with David around some of the content of this early on, because I was moving in a different direction and needed some direction from someone about what to do with all this material. And then the other thing about, and I went to talk to David, but the other thing about David was that I knew his father. I had met Sam when he came here with Cargill. In fact, Sam was responsible for getting me an audience before the board of directors of Cargill Corporation, where he worked. And I was their luncheon speaker at one of their downtown board meetings. And that was an interesting opportunity. And so I identified David as a person that I could work with. And Ann said, well, we've done some work with David before. Let's get him on. I said, then, well, you negotiate with David and make whatever arrangement needs to be. And I'm here. And David and I got started. And it took us well over a year, maybe close to 2 years to get this thing together. And we got it together. And it turned out, I think, reasonably well. And the stories in there are my stories, but the storyteller, David, played a major part in putting that together in a form and format that people would be interested in reading. I've already been receiving some feedback from people who have read it. My brother, my young brother, called me the other day and said, man, this is good. That I didn't think this is what it would be like. That I didn't know. And he said, I learned some stuff in here myself about you and about what was going on that I didn't know before. And he was really excited about it. And his daughter had gifted him the book. And I've heard from other people who are just in the early phases of reading it, and they think it was well worth having been written. And now I'm gonna let you, Al, and David, and all the rest around this come in at this point.
Well, this is a great beginning, T. And let me disagree with you. Your storytelling, just listening to you, has always been and remains fascinating and powerful. And but I can imagine, as you're saying, that that gift of analysis and presentation is simply further enhanced by the marvelous capabilities of David Grant, a wordsmith and a craftsman in the language and in media and in ideation. So, David, thank you for being here. When this project came to you, how did David Grant become the right person for this assignment? Because I think you obviously were and are.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for that. Yeah, I was really moved when in your intro, Al, you gave praise and credit to the ancestors for the fact that all of us are here and that we had their broad, powerful shoulders to stand on. Even as a kid, I think I understood that I had an assignment, from the ancestors. And I was that kid who at 10, 11, 12, the other kids would listen to the elders talk about stuff, talk about the past, talk about family history, and they couldn't get out of the room quickly enough, right? But I was that kid who wanted to just sit there and listen to these stories and take them in. And I wanted to be ready to pass these stories on to my kids and make sure that their kids knew these stories too. So I think I kind of grew up, honestly, with that sense of mission about being a curator and a caretaker of our people's stories. So when T came to me a few years ago and we had a lunch sitting outdoors and talked about the nature of what he wanted to do, and this big unruly box of a manuscript that he had hauled over to the Historical Society and said, hey, we need to turn this into something. Do you think you'd be interested in helping me? And of course, that is right down the middle of what's in my wheelhouse, right? So
Mhm.
I was hoping things would evolve and that this would become a project, a real thing. And sure enough, a couple of years down the road, it did. So I was thrilled for the opportunity to work with T. And I knew some of these stories because of my parents' activism in
Mhm.
Minneapolis. So when the project came together, I was definitely ready to hit the ground running and sit shoulder to shoulder with T and get to the writing. So
So let
yeah,
me
I'm
take
very
it
happy
somewhere
with
else
what
with you,
we're able
David.
to do.
Let me take this to another level. The level is our obligation and our duty to the ancestors. And I guess I'm speaking about the sense of mission
Yes.
that you are referring to. This work, this opportunity, fulfill the obligation we have to antiquity and therefore to the future. What's in your mind on around that?
Well, I think especially during times like these, socially, politically, that we're living through, uh, I think it's very important for the younger generation to have steady, calm voices from all of us who are their elders to let them know, don't lose your mind here. We've seen this movie before. We've been on this dangerous ground before, and look what we did. We managed to rise. We managed to survive.
Right.
Not only survive but thrive against really pretty incredible odds.
Great.
And that resilience and that strength that has been passed down to us, we need to own it. We need to claim it, and we need to put it to work to build that future that is waiting for us down the road. And so job one in this book, in many ways, I think, and it was a brilliant idea of T's to name it Rewind, to let people know, yes, whatever we're going through at the moment, this is very similar. They say history doesn't exactly repeat, but it rhymes. And so you need to be able to
Right.
put your hands around what we're going through now that rhymes with certain things that have happened in the past. How did we get through those times? And what lessons can we, um, illuminate and put before people that will help folks calm down and be planful about, where does our next footfall need to be, as we navigate our way through these troubled times that we're living in. So that was really the intent, I think, behind what we have done with this book. And hopefully younger activists coming up who are taking the wheel now can use this as a reference book to kind of think through, okay, here are some patterns that we've seen in the past, and what are some of the ways that our elders and the generations before them figured out how to navigate our people through these times so that we can keep moving forward.
I love what you're saying, David. Honestly, I feel like I often find myself preaching this to my generation, exactly what you're saying. I think that oftentimes
David.
young people or my generation, younger generation will think of this as just through a lens of history, all these experiences, racism, sexism, violence, that it's history. And I think that intergenerational conversations, intergenerational connectedness are things that are going to be crucial in handing your wisdom down and your advice down to my generation and the ones after us, whether that be through classrooms or freedom schools or, oral history or leadership or organizations, churches, barbershops, just family dinners, Thanksgivings, those kinds of things. I really, I feel like I also am on the same hill with you, preaching to my generation how important it is to want to hear those stories, to stay in the room just like you did when you were younger, because that and fostering that intergenerational engagement is really going to be how we can, number one, avoid repeating mistakes, but number two, learn what worked and use that to further progress, and use that to further our activism and our engagement. And, as you guys were both talking, there was a question that was coming onto my mind. How has both of you, how have your definitions of activism evolved over the decades? Because I think that's something that will provide a lot of insight for the younger generation to see where you started versus where you are, and the lessons we can learn from that in your activism in this vein of conversation, but of course in all aspects of life. So how has your definition of activism evolved over the decades?
And let me throw something on top of that, T in particular. You mentioned, the turbulent times of the late 60s. You throw a couple of names out. Spike Moss, a leader at the Way, but a name we don't hear much about anymore. Matt Eubanks, Syl Davis. So put into context those radical community voices versus maybe the more moderate voices. What would be moderate? I would say contemporaries of yours like Tolly Flippin, like Elmer Childress. Tolly Flippin was the head of the NAACP for a number of years over in South Minneapolis. Elmer Childress was a union leader, and even another union leader or labor organizer. To think of her name now, I'll come back. We lost T for a second, but you'll get back in. David, go ahead and respond. What did activism look like early on, and how did it look as you interviewed T to develop this story?
Well, we did talk a lot about what the landscape looked like in terms of the diversity of leadership that already existed as T came to town and got himself acclimated. Crisis brings forth people who are willing to step up and take a leadership role. And one of the things that I think we have always known as a people is that you need to move ahead with a diversity of viewpoints. You move that right foot forward and then the left foot. That's how you walk. If you're only walking with one, you're not walking, you're hopping. It's a very different thing. So people who look at us from the outside can look and feel somewhat confused and not really understand the totality of how we are looking at the big picture. People looked at Malcolm X and at Martin Luther King and thought, oh, these two, they're like oil and water. We can't talk to Malcolm and his people. They too radical. They too crazy. We can talk to the Reverend here. But the reality is, if you really dug in to the message and to the spirit behind what both of them were doing, there wasn't a whole lot of daylight. I mean, they loved and appreciated and admired each other, and realized that we need a diversity of ways to get at this thing which is trying to hold us back. And so the same thing evolved here. I think people who felt a little skittish about working directly with folk like Matt Eubanks and like Spike Moss didn't understand them and didn't understand the ferocity and the intensity, the anger, right? That motivated their activism, and were frightened by it, frankly. But they didn't understand that people like T were so much in sync with them in terms of what our end goals were. Right. And so they could look at each other with a wink and a nod and understand, look, we are much more unified than we appear to be to them. And we don't care, really. We don't have to care how comfortable they are or uncomfortable they are with the fact that we have unity and a powerful connection between us. Let's just look at the reality the way it is. And if they're comfortable talking to me, fine, let them come to me. But you and I are going to continue to talk and do what we need to do in order to move our people forward. And so that's what was going on all the time. And that's a story as old as the hills. It really is. In terms of, yeah. Al, what were you going to say?
Haley, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, you know, as you're talking, the message I'm hearing is how important it is to have these deliberate conversations, even if they're difficult, even if, you know, an external lens will have you believe that you're on opposite sides of the aisle here. Having these deliberate conversations is what's going to be absolutely crucial to success. And from Gen Z, you know, I definitely resonate with that too, having these intentional conversations and create the spaces to have these intentional conversations. And that's not just on social media, you know, and I think that social media is definitely impacted people's belief that they're having conversations that maybe are not being had or not being had in the manner and to the degree that they need to be. And so I think that that's why Black media such as this, the conversation with Al McFarlane or the Penumbra Theater or this book that you're writing are so incredibly crucial for our community. And so as you're talking, a question that came to me that I would like to hear about as you, as the person who is doing the form and format, the editing, what chapter in the book would you say was the hardest to write or to edit or to include, and why? Which chapter was it? What was it about that chapter that was the hardest, but you included anyway because you thought that story and that message was so important for everyone to come to read it and to hear those stories?
That's a great question, Haley. And thanks for it. I'm not sure sitting here at this moment how to answer that, because every chapter in this book, and there are a lot of different aspects, a lot of different points of view that are taken by the chapters of this book. It's not strictly linear, but I think the hardest thing was figuring out where the kind of the through line was that connect all of these very diverse things that we talk about. So it isn't, there was no particular chapter that was harder to write than any other, I would say. But figuring out, and I have to give credit to our amazing editor, Ann Regan, for this, helping figure out what the flow of the book needed to be was probably the hardest single thing about it, because we didn't want to be redundant and make people feel like, wait a minute, didn't I read this 50 pages ago? Isn't this basically the same thing? So we had to help the reader understand, no, we're going to talk about this again, but we're going to look at it through a different lens, from a different perspective now. So stay with us and you'll feel rewarded, we promise, by the time you get to the end of this section of the book. So that was probably the hardest single thing to do, because there are, you will note when you read it, there are things where we seem to loop back to pick up certain ideas that were talked about earlier in the book. Hi, welcome back, T.
Hey, T.
And we even acknowledge that at the very end of the book, because we have a nice illustration made by one of the collaborators that works with Minnesota Historical Society Press, who drew us a wonderful image of the Ghanaian Sankofa bird.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And with the bird is in the process of moving forward into the future, but as she does, she leans back and touches base with the territory that she has covered in the past, recognizing that that's the only way to take a sure step forward, is to make sure that I'm in full command of where I've been.
Right.
And so that's what we try to do with the book too. That was the hardest thing about writing it.
Right. I love that. You know, and my last, like my kind of little builder question while T fully logs on for you. And, you know, obviously share what you feel makes sense in this conversation. But as you're talking, I'm just appreciative of how important this table and this conversation is right now. I'm wondering, were there stories or events that you chose not to include in the book, and why did you choose not to include them?
Well, how about that, T? Well, you know, you look in this book back over a very long career, and a lot of people that you've interacted with and worked with closely, some not so closely. So what do you say about that?
No, you have to unmute, T. You're muted. Unmute. There we go.
There.
Oh,
you did it. There we go.
Okay, you got it now. Yeah, well, there are a number of, when I started with this, my problem was I wanted to include everything, and that was part of what was getting in the way of it, because I would remember their stories, some of the detail, and I recognized that not all of this could be in. I didn't have any way myself of excluding. I was in this time, it was good that I was working with someone else who was looking at all of what I was putting together from a perspective of what of this tells the story, and yet leaves some of it to the imagination of the people who are reading it, that they could carry it forward of that. And it was not necessary to have all of the detail. My tendency was to put everything in, and I didn't know what to take out. And I trusted that the people that I was working with here would eliminate the excess that did not would not have a negative impact on the meaning of the story. There were what was left out. I can't think of anything that was left out that I have some issues about that. There are some names of people that I thought I had included in it that I did not, that were important to me, and I went through the index of the book looking for those names, and I didn't see them, and then I had difficulty recalling, what the context of the names were. But I was impressed with the fidelity of the storytelling and how it did. And I was really also impressed with David taking my words and taking them a little bit beyond where I had carried them. It was particularly, and this is leading up to beginning with the earlier parts of it, when he was describing my experiences and living with my sister in Portland, Maine, and some of the trauma that was involved with that. I was impressed with how he told that part of the story and the sensitivity with which he dealt with that, because those are some dealing with some things that we all have family stories and issues and concerns that we have that we think are important to the story, but we don't want to overwhelm people with it. But it's important to.
T, let me throw out a couple of names to have you respond to. Your friend and mine, Liz Samuels, Bernadette Anderson, Harry Davis. Big names. Talk about those just briefly.
And those weren't in there. Mm-hmm. And and I thought about that, and within these were people who were Harry is in there, of course, because Harry is my board chair, but Harry was a significant one there and played a big story. And the other thing about when I got to what I wanted to do with Harry has two books with which he's told his story, and so I didn't find that it was as important for me to put much more, any more than I did in there about Harry. Now, Bernadette is one that I probably could have been mentioned and should have been, and Liz perhaps is much more, because I have a personal history with Liz and her daughter. One of the things I intended to do, I don't think we did it, in telling the story of setting up the urban coalition. Liz's daughter Gloria was our secretary, and she played a key role. But Larry and I used to bounce our ideas off her, and there was a story and I might have that in my paper somewhere if I could look hard enough. Gloria wrote a beautiful 2-page thing about, because that was the time when the corporations were not using Black people in their advertising. And Gloria wrote this, gave it to me, and I sent the paper that Gloria wrote to Pillsbury and to General Mills and to, at that time, International Multifoods. It was International Milling at the time. And the story, Gloria set it up like this, was that they were all at a party dancing and everything. And she introduced some of the products that these corporations made in sort of a dialogue kind of situation where people were talking about and tasting the food. And she was really a gifted writer. And I shared that with them. And the feedback that I got from one of the corporations was that, well, they don't, they have advertising agencies that they use to create their advertising, so that then in a sense that there wasn't much they could do about it. But they did say that they sent Gloria's piece to them. And really, I don't want to attribute this to anything but it wasn't much long after that where you began to see more stereotypical these ads where you would have Black people in a party tasting people's product and in what they thought was a good setting for it. Now that they may have picked up some of that from what we sent. You never know, but you push it on and you do what you can. But that that's a story that I could have been included in this that wasn't.
So T, let me focus on the concept of rewind. That's a particularly powerful name right now. The right now means two things. Yesterday, in South Minneapolis on 30th or Lake Street and Bloomington, a big conflagration, helicopters in the air all afternoon and early evening yesterday, a protest in the street blocking traffic following a raid by federal, county, and city officers. Now they're saying around issues of drug use and other things. But at the time, people were saying this was an ICE originated raid. So there's this tension in South Minneapolis at this moment. This moment also is basking in the memory of George Floyd. And I wanted you, having witnessed what happened on Plymouth Avenue in the 60s, to contextualize, rewind again is the perfect name, what happened with George Floyd and what happened yesterday, and where do we go from here? What do you think, T. Williams?
Yeah, well, I want to reflect on the title of the book, Rewind. That when we were beginning to rewrite the manuscript, my daughter, who typed up a lot of when I was creating the first manuscript, she transcribed all of this for me. And she wrote a page in which she used the word rewind, and she used it within the context of which you would just thinking, Mike, because she then took it back to the different events that were going on then, and then she said, in a sense, then she put it in and saying, "You were there to witness that." That I was there to witness that and that. Well, it reminds me that when I reflect on what's going on now, none of this is new. What is different are the characters, but the settings are so similar, and the misinformation about what is going on, the lack of communication with the people who are impacted by this, and they're allowing people to make their own judgments about what's going on based upon what they have experienced. We look at things through our own lenses, and if we've been negatively impacted by these experiences, then that's how we're going to react. That's how we're going to behave. And there we haven't some of our communication outlets, we fail in the sense of including key people in on what's going on, so that the best kind of communication back to our community is not the printed or the broadcast media, is the what people bring and speak directly to their neighbors about. The sort of word of mouth is still important. If I hear something and I take it to you and you take it to someone else, and then how we interpret that is it shows that the credibility, the lack of credibility has grown in the community, and the only way we get credibility is to do credible things, and we haven't seen enough of those credible events for people to believe that they have their best interest at heart. And
Right.
and it reminded me of when I don't know whether it was '69 or what have you, when we had all of the people called the troops that came out up on Plymouth Avenue in North Minneapolis, and people were frightened and didn't know what was going on, what to expect, because no information, important information, was not shared with the people who were in the best position to know how to use it and communicate it to the people who are affected by that. And our different institutions, like the Phyllis Wheatley and when the Way was there, and some of the others, that the people in there were in direct communication with people who were in communication with others, and could take that information and move it back into the community. And example of that, when we had after Dr. King's assassination in Minneapolis, was one of the few communities where there was not an explosion in the street from following that assassination. And we write about this in there, and that happened deliberately because the people who were in a position to make a difference were also networking with other people who could participate in that process, and put together the kind of teamwork that could be right where the activities were likely to take place, and diffuse it then and there. And we don't have enough of that, and I think we don't have it because people don't trust one another, and we lost some of our key and important institutions where a lot of that was taking place and being developed. And what's going on now, there seems to be the people that are put in control of some of our key institutions don't believe in the mission of those institutions. Therefore,
do you mean
trying to divert.
Do you mean people in charge, meaning Black people in charge of Black institutions, or white people in charge of white institutions? Which ones don't believe?
I really mean both, Al, but especially those white institutions, which really, there are some major white institutions that are critical to the well-being of Black people, and that they are diverting the mission of those institutions, and because the leadership is, this whole notion of deciding that, we have to get rid of all of the diversity in our, because for some weird reason, people believe that only one kind of people are blessed with the capacity to know what to do and the right things, and it's all their responsibility to do it, and you're left out. And I don't see I don't see enough pushback when those things are happening and those institutions are changing, and then it becomes that if you've got leadership in the major institutions who control all the resources, are making decisions about what happens in some of those other institutions, they're going to be looking to put people in those places that will carry their mission, not the mission of the people.
Let me, I didn't properly introduce Haley Taylor Schlitz when we started off, but, and you haven't met her before, David, I introduced her to you. She's a 22-year-old attorney, and she is an assistant attorney on the staff of Attorney General Keith Ellison. Haley Taylor Schlitz is the youngest African-American woman to graduate from law school. And law is her second career. She was also a teacher before she went into being a professional lawyer. And I met her when she was assigned to be one of the surrogate speakers for the Kamala Harris campaign. And I was so impressed and gravitated to get her voice representing that generation into Inside News. And so in a sense, from my view, T and David, Haley Taylor Schlitz is what we've been working for and what we've been praying for. And she has delivered. She is showing up with purpose, integrity, and a fierceness. And we're going to go a little past the time slot for the program, so hang loose if you would. But I want Haley to reflect not only on this conversation, but what your thoughts were and the things you've been writing and the experiences you had as part of our panels at George Floyd Square. And beneath the through line here, as David would say, is the importance of documenting, telling our own story. And the other through line, David, is this notion of who we are to each other versus our interaction with the culture outside of our own culture. In narrative in Nubia, we call the one the social structure and the other the governance structure. The governance structure being how we interact with each other, what we do for each other, regardless of what the outside says. The social structure is real because we operate in that arena of power, and of commerce. And so we have to navigate, be bilingual, or what's the right word for it? Double-mindedness, right? And being both ourselves, but also operating in a hostile environment that doesn't respect our humanity or accord us the dignity that we deserve, that we prevail regardless. Haley, jump in and talk about your summary of the conversations we had around George Floyd, and George Floyd Week, but also your work as an attorney and your vision as a 22-year-old that builds on the work of David Grant and T. Williams and Al McFarlane.
Right. No, I think that's a really great question. And I really appreciate you posing it to me because during our time at George Floyd Square, George Floyd Week, our George Floyd conversations, I think that I got a lot of pearls of wisdom. We talked about everything from where were you when you heard the news to, what can, the younger next generation take away and use to carry on the torch. Healing, if you can heal from this, and how, and what you can do with the arts or just with mental health and prayer to truly be able to, come back together as one community and move on from this if that time ever comes, if that's possible. We had really deep, meaningful conversations about these things. And I really, really enjoyed being on several of the panels. We talked about law and justice and kind of what we can do in our advocacy, the different veins of advocacy that you, David, and T were talking about, from just oral history to legislature and legislative action to, electing people into office or, like I said, just at the barbershop or at church or at the Thanksgiving dinner table. There's all different forms of advocacy, online, in person. We talked about that during George Floyd Week. We had some really good, deep, meaningful conversations. It's worth anyone who's listening right now who didn't see it. It's still up. It's recorded. It's worth checking out. Really, really great conversations with very diverse panels, different people every single day who had perspectives that witnessed George Floyd's murder, that that reflected on where they were and what it meant to them. And for me, kind of turning the direction and the eye on me and what I was thinking, and after hearing your conversation, connecting the two, like I started this conversation, a theme for me that rings true in everything I do is how I can kind of lean on the village and the forest, if you will, that came before me. And I say forest because a poem that's really meaningful to me is When Great Trees Fall by Maya Angelou. And so just knowing that the shoulders that we stand on, the giants that we stand on, those who came before us are also trees in a forest that surrounds us and supports us and shows us how to grow. And kind of knowing that there's so much power and wisdom that comes from that, leaning into that and taking that and carrying it forward is something that I think is the purpose of each new generation and the definition of progress. And that is definitely something that I echoed during the George Floyd week conversations, and that I echo here, especially after what you were saying, David, on how you were as a youth, and T, hearing your stories and just really appreciating what this book means. It's not just a collection of history. It really is you sharing your stories in a way that the next generation can hear, even long after all of us are gone. So for me, I think that where my mind is at now is just, is there something that you wish every young person would take away, every young activist would take away from your book? Both David, who formed and formatted it and put it in a way that was the flow and digestible, and T, with your stories and your words and your experiences. Is there something that you hope that everyone, young and every generation, but as a young person, young activists, take away from your book after reading it? What do you want them to feel? What do you want them to know? What do you want them to think? Because that's where I'm at, and I'm always craving it.
Yeah. I think that to me, what I'd like one of the takeaways to be is how interdependent we all are. Right. That we don't do things solely by ourselves. Right. And I think that it is important for young people, I think, to understand the value of network. Right. You can never know too many people, I think. Right. Right. And that evaluate your networks, right. And they are beneficial to you if you use them. Right. You have to learn how to systematically use your networks. Right. I have throughout my life, every phase of my life, the things that I've done, I can point to someone else being involved or instrumental to that. Someone that started me. My family ended up in Minneapolis, not because I decided that was where we wanted to go. Someone that I had gone to school with gave my name to someone up here in Minneapolis that I didn't know, and they, in turn, I get a telephone call, and I end up here. And every move that I've made since I've been in Minneapolis, I can connect it with individuals and our institution. I love that. Stay connected. That's what I'm saying. Stay connected.
I love that. I love that. Thank you for your words of wisdom. And Al, thank you for this conversation. David, I want to hear what you have to say, but I just wanted to throw that out there because this is this really fills my cup. I look forward to this every single week.
Yeah. When you're first learning to get comfortable in the water, when elders around you are trying to help you learn how to swim, it's counterintuitive to a little kid, that if you just lay back on the water, it will actually hold you up. You will float, and you'll be breathing, and you'll discover that you belong in the water as much as you belong on land. And that's where we all started anyway, in our mother's womb, right? So learning to trust the community around you feels a little bit like that. Right. Relax into it and understand that, you will be held up and supported, and you will not drown. Yeah. And that you are in a place where you belong. Yeah. Yeah. And, the horrible days of the long hot summers of 1964 through 1969,
Right.
were so hard on communities. But I think the primary reason that Minneapolis and St. Paul didn't explode was that through the Urban Coalition, which was a brand new institution built by both Black and white hands. People were, just trying to be creative and put their good intentions to work.
Right.
And what the coalition was able to do is create a framework that could be nimble and that could respond to community desires and needs without having to go through a lengthy process of getting ideas vetted and funded, and something that could take months and months and months.
Right.
The leadership of this seemingly unruly organization that shouldn't work, according to people's traditional ways of working, that had been inherited from times past, was able to fund the Soul Patrol in North and South Minneapolis and the Red Patrol in predominantly Native American Franklin Avenue corridor, that actually put community volunteers out on the street in large numbers, who were able to, these are people who knew and loved their community. These are people who took a lot of the burden that police officers don't like anyway, dealing with mentally ill people or folks who are in some sort of mental crisis. Our community volunteers from the Soul Patrol and the Red Patrol knew those folk. They knew their families. Some of them knew who their psychiatrist was, right? And so people could get help. People could get a glass of water and sit down on the stoop with somebody who they knew and felt comfortable with.
Right.
Police call never had to be made, right? These folk got the help that they needed. And so that's part of what happened on the street during the unrest that was very close to popping off. Right? Neighborhood patrols were out, and it gave people who were community minded a powerful way to show their community orientation, their community mindedness, and it made people feel comfortable. Hey, these are our neighbors. We know these folk.
Yeah.
And it squelched rumors, right? They were not able to spread because trusted voices were out there.
Right.
Right. And so even though at first I think that there was a lot of friction with the police and they were very skeptical about how all this was going to work, the community wound up getting a lot of converts from the police department, won over to them because they were like, yeah, okay, we see what you're talking about. We're getting fewer calls that are of the kind that we don't like to do anyway, and that we recognize we're not always good at. Right. So there's no reason in the world why we can't be creative and figure out some ways to bring the spirit and the energy that created the Soul Patrol and the Red Patrol back. It's clearly part of what we need to do in order to navigate our way through these times right now, because we can see that the consent decree that was going to, keep the police department working on that work of transformation that clearly needs to be done. The ball has been dropped on that. Right. And so the community has to step up and say, not so fast. Let us exercise our voice here.
I love that.
And help steer things in the right direction that will not be threatening to the police union, not be threatening to police officers. We're not about that. We're just trying to do some grassroots problem solving. Right.
I love that. And I think you framed that really beautifully. Al, thank you for having this conversation.
Haley, thank you. David, thank you. And T, thank you so much. Let me remind people that there's going to be an author talk, Rewind, Lessons from 50 Years of Activism, the name of the book, Sunday, June 15th from 1 to 2:30 p.m. You can join authors T. Williams and David Lawrence Grant in a conversation and celebration of their new book, Rewind, Lessons from 50 Years of Activism, published by the Minnesota Historical Society Press. And like today, T will share insights on navigating crises and building networks and maintaining a commitment to community. And that goes back from the crises of the 60s through the current day, the 2020 murder of George Floyd and beyond. They're going to have books available for purchase and signing. You don't want to miss it. I will be there. Hope you'll be there as well. T, thank you so much. David, thank you so much. Haley, thank you. I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Al.